Bruce was one of the most complex men that I ever knew. There were many, many facets and many sides to Bruce. When we're talking about Bruce, we're talking about, first of all, the martial artist. We are talking about the actor, filmmaker. We are talking about a friend. We are talking about a father. We're talking about a legend. And sometimes all of those things run together, but they made up the whole. They made up the person. And he was extremely complex. First of all, in order to understand Bruce in any of those areas, you have to understand where he was coming from. And Bruce was a very angry man, had a lot of anger in him. And the main source of his consternation and his anger was the Hollywood establishment. Bruce wanted more than anything to be an international film star. He was a wonderful actor. He understood film. And the only thing he ever got from Hollywood was there's no way an Asian was going to be a leading man. Period. Not going to happen. You're going to have to be a driver, a servant, something that Bruce considered demeaning. It was, the old pigtail thing. Bruce did not like that, was not going to accept that, period. This was the source of his anger. He was driven to prove them wrong, so he worked even harder as a martial artist so that when his opportunity came, he would be ready. He certainly was an incredible teacher. At one time, he was the highest paid karate instructor in the world. Everything he did, and everyone who knew Bruce, who really knew him, loved him. Yet, he was very private in that he did not just let anyone in. He had some paranoia. It was almost like, what do you want from me? Why are you trying to be my friend? You must want something from me. So he had that aloofness, and a lot of people took that for him being a snob, which he wasn't. But that's not an uncommon trait with celebrities, because they're always trying to shield themselves from the hangers-on or the people who want something from them because of what they are and not necessarily because of who they are. I can remember being at Bruce's house with he and Linda when Brandon was little, and to see him pick up his son and give his son a kiss and show the tenderness and put his son to bed, leave all of his guests and everyone. His son was more important. He didn't say, Linda, do this. He did it. The funny thing is, he never wanted his son, Brandon, for example, to ever even consider being an actor. He said, someday you're going to grow up to be the biggest producer in Hollywood, and you're going to call the shots, and you'll tell everybody who can be a star and who can't be a star. No one's going to tell you that because you're Chinese that you can't be a leading man. So that's the goal that he had for his son. In 1971, Chuck Norris put on the World Pro-Am Karate Championships in Los Angeles at the Sports Arena. Bruce Lee came as a favor to Chuck as his guest of honor and special guest. And Chuck had asked Bruce if he would award the Grand Championship trophy to the black belt who won the Ultimate title. And Bruce, of course, said he would be very happy to. The day started with the little kids fighting, the little juniors, white belts and yellow belts. When those kids won, and I don't know, the tournament queen or someone who was going to give them their trophies, Bruce got up and went there all on his own and took the trophies and himself handed it to these kids. That he would be that sensitive. And of course the kids are looking up at Bruce Lee with their mouths agape, looking at this man, and but he would do that. And to show that sensitivity and that tenderness, that stays with me. when I look at a Bruce Lee film, I see Bruce. I know he's acting, but I never see that tender moment. And I know that was part of him. I remember doing a film in which I hired an old-time stuntman, very old man. He was in his 70s, who was a stuntman back in the Max Sennett days of the old chase scenes, and he was a great driver, stunt driver. He said, I was Bruce Lee's stunt double. And now here's this little old man in his 70s. I said, Harvey, you know, you're almost 80 years old. What could you do for Bruce Lee? And he says, I was his stunt driver when that TV thing he did about Kato, and he said, you know, the sucker couldn't drive a lick. Bruce had a passion to own a Porsche. There was one day in the Sherman Oaks Karate School, which Chuck Norris owned in partnership with Bob Wall, of which I was the chief instructor. And we were in the office, the three of us, Bob Wall, Chuck Norris, and myself, when we heard this god-awful noise out front, the screeching of tires. We heard a car bang against the curb. We thought, oh my God, you know, the world is coming to an end. We rushed outside, and there is this brand new Porsche sort of sitting at a cockeyed angle on the curve. Wasn't very well parked. And Bruce Lee is standing next to it with his arms folding it and just looking it over and just as proud as he could be. He said, guys, look at my new car. We said, Bruce, it's beautiful, but we thought, you know, something happened. No, everything's fine. He says, Chuck, come on for a ride. I'm going to take you for a ride in my new car. Well, Chuck froze in terror. He said, Bruce, I've got to run back to my other school. I've got lessons to teach. I'll see you later, but remember, you owe me a ride. Oh, sure. Pat, come on, jump in the car. I said, well, Bruce, you know, my classes are about to start. I've got to go inside. Another time, okay? Oh, sure. Bob, come on. I'll take you for a ride in my car. It's great, you know, hot. And Bob says, Bruce, I have an appointment. I have a deal coming in. I'm going to sell somebody a lesson. Bruce never got it. We said, you know, why don't you just jump in and go for a ride, you know, and we'll catch you another time. Okay, guys. He never got the fact that no way did we want to get into the car with Bruce. And, of course, he just drove off in his new car, was going to show somebody else. But there's a prequel to that story. Steve McQueen, who was my best friend up to the time that he died, he was a student of Bruce Lee for many years, and after Bruce became a very famous film star, of course, he no longer taught lessons, so Steve began to train with Chuck Norris and eventually with myself. And after Bruce had passed, Steve told me the story that one day after Bruce had come back from doing a film in Hong Kong, he had called Steve. He said, Steve, I've got to get a Porsche. I want to get a Porsche like yours. Now, Steve, you have to realize, was a world-class driver. He could have made a living as a Grand Prix driver. He was that good. Anyway, Steve said to Bruce, look, Bruce, let me take you for a ride in my Porsche. It's really a hot car, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can get into a lot of trouble with this thing. So Bruce was all excited. He said, okay. So Steve went and pulled up and picked up Bruce, and they went to Mulholland Drive around the San Fernando Valley in L.A. Now, Mulholland Drive is a very narrow, very high road on the top of the mountains that surround the San Fernando Valley. Very twisty, and if you miss a turn, you're going to go off into the valley. So Bruce and Steve went up to the San Fernando Valley, up to the Mulholland Drive to go for the ride. Now, Bruce was sitting next to Steve, and if you've never been in a Porsche, they have a very deep wheel well or foot well where your feet goes in a very low seat so you can stretch your legs straight out. And Steve was really focused on the road. And he said, okay, Bruce, you ready? And you heard Bruce say, yes, I'm all set. Let's go. Well, Steve took that sucker, that Porsche, through its paces. And he was just driving it like crazy. And he'd say, what do you think of this power, Bruce? And Bruce said nothing. He heard no noise over there. And Steve says, now watch this. And he goes through the twisting turns and twisting around. And isn't that great, Bruce? See how it handles? Now watch this when I slide it. And Steve would put the thing into a tail slide, going right near the edge of the... And isn't that great, Bruce? No sound. He twists the other way, no sound. He says, now watch this, Bruce. This sucker will do a mean 180. And Steve goes, gears down, and spins it around, does a total 180. Stops the car, and he looks over and he says, well, what do you think, Bruce? And Bruce isn't there. Bruce! And he looks down. Bruce is down in the footwell, covered up. And he gets up. I can't use the language that Bruce used, but he said, "McQueen, I'll kill you. I'll kill you, McQueen. I'm going to kill you." And Steve said, his eyes open. He said, "Uh-oh, here is Bruce Lee, angry, the toughest guy in the world. He's angry and he wants to kill me." So Steve said he took off and started going as fast as he could in the highway. He said, "Bruce, calm down." And Bruce is saying, "Steve, slow down, slow down." And Steve said, "You won't hit me, will you, Bruce? No, you won't touch me, will you? No, you won't hurt me, will you? No, just stop the car. Stop the car." So Steve pulled it over to the side, and Bruce said, "I'd never drive with you again, McQueen. Never." And that was it. But Bruce then did go out and get his own Porsche. Steve, at the time in the middle 60s, was the #1 box office star in Hollywood. He was the man. He was the highest paid actor. Every top film went to him. And that's exactly what Bruce Lee wanted. Bruce Lee wanted to be a top international film star. By the same token, Steve McQueen, who was a really rough, tough guy, he had the greatest respect for Bruce because Bruce could kick ass. And that's what Steve wanted to be. Steve wanted to be what Bruce Lee was, this great martial artist. And Bruce wanted to be what Steve was. And they had this mutual respect. Bruce for Steve as an actor, Steve for Bruce as a martial artist. And there was a lot of interaction. For example, when Bruce Lee first went to Hong Kong, another story that Steve told me, and came back after doing, before Enter the Dragon, of course, but after he had done a couple of the hits that he had made over there, The Big Boss, I've forgotten which ones they were. But anyway, Bruce, when he got back into town, had called Steve, and Steve wasn't in at the time, so Steve got Bruce's message that he was back in town and staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. So Steve put together a package with a picture of himself, and he autographed it to Bruce Lee, my favorite fan, Steve. And again, when it went over there, when Bruce opened it, Steve told me later that Bruce called him. He said, "McQueen, you dirty rat, I'm a star too now. I am a movie star too. Don't you send me this stuff." And Steve, of course, rolled on the floor because they knew what buttons to push on each other. And it was really a wonderful, wonderful, though competitive relationship. When Bruce first went back to Hong Kong, after having been rejected by Hollywood so often, he was nervous, but he was never unconfident. He was not only proving to Hollywood, he had to prove to himself that he could do it. He did it. He proved to himself that he was right, that his ideas were correct. And he never had a lack of confidence in his physical ability or in his acting ability. That was never a question. But his thoughts, his ideas had never been accepted. He'd never had a chance to put them on film to see if they worked. And when he did it, he knew that he was right, that his ideas were correct. Bruce had the aura of a leader when he went in to Enter the Dragon. He didn't have to say, "I'm the boss," or yell at anyone. He said, "This is what we're going to do." And it was never, "It might work," or "I think we should do this." He said, "This is what we're going to do." And he knew it was going to work, and you knew, by the way he said it, that was going to work. There was no question. He was the leader of that show. Bruce had a philosophy, which I still use today. Bruce always said, you never tell a guy what you're going to do to him till you're sitting on his chest. And because of that, Bruce always had the advantage. You never knew what to expect. You never knew what he was going to do. He didn't tell you, "I'm going to punch you in the mouth, I'm going to rip your head off, I'm going to do this." Wonderful attitude, very, very strong will. What kind of mind do you think it took to overcome that system? What kind of drive? What kind of will? I mean, just incredible. Absolutely incredible. His resolve, it's probably the strongest resolve I've ever seen. Bruce Lee was a cinematic genius. Not just an actor and a charismatic character, and not just a great martial artist, but he was a genius with film. He knew where to place a camera, he knew angles, he knew lens size, so frame size, and he knew how to present a character on film. Today, when you see a fight in a martial arts film, if one guy is beating up two guys or three guys or whatever it is, it's going from one blow to the next blow to the next strike to the next, whatever it might be. And in those, there is no character within the fight. Bruce's genius came out on how he could present a character. After one or two or three blows, there was that moment, that pause, where he just knew all of what was inside of him was coming out. It wasn't just a physical thing. When Bruce first started to train with Chuck, the style that Bruce studied believed in a lot of very effective low kicking for street fighting and self-defense, and that was his primary goal. When Bruce got to the point where he was going to be on the big screen, that type of kicking was not as cinematic, it was not as visual. When you got this great big screen and you're throwing a kick, you wouldn't like that kick to sweep across the whole screen. You really want to show something. Bruce actually came to Chuck, and one of the things that he'd learned was the Korean form of kicking. All of those big, high, fancy, sweeping kicks, the circular ones. Chuck gave that knowledge to Bruce, and Bruce considered that a gift. Bruce had such a great respect for Chuck because Chuck was, first of all, a legitimate world and international karate champion. Those were titles that Bruce never won, but Bruce was a fabulous, great martial artist. He could have been a champion if that's what he wanted to do. All of his energy went into a different direction. Now, with Chuck as the world champion, and Bruce brought him to the screen and then beat Chuck up in the film, Bruce was telling the world, I am legitimate. And Chuck believed in that as well. And even today, when you hear people talk and try to compare the two, well, I saw Bruce Lee beat Chuck Norris in that movie, so that legitimized Bruce's martial arts ability in the eyes of a lot of people. Not to Chuck and not to Bruce, but to the world at large. If you've ever watched the wind and the tide working together, they're two completely different, opposing forces, and yet when they blow together, there's a certain point, and Chuck was the tide, and Bruce was the wind. Well, the tide can only go, has a limit. The wind can go on forever. And they flowed together up to the point of the shoreline, and that's where the tide stopped. The tide was beaten. It couldn't go any further. And the wind continued. And that was Bruce. And it was all-encompassing, and the wind can overpower the ocean. The appeal of that fight between Chuck and Bruce, I think you had two outstanding martial artists, but you had two people who genuinely respected each other. And that mutual respect is what the fight was based on. That both fighters gave you the sense that I'm going in this completely confident that I'm going to win, but this just might be the guy who could beat me. When you always see Bruce Lee, you always knew that Bruce was in total control, but he deserved to be. And I felt that vulnerability, and Bruce showed it to me in that fight scene. He did a little bit of it in the end at Enter the Dragon with Han in the Hall of Mirrors, there's a little bit of it there. Just a touch. Just enough to let me know that Bruce might get hurt, that he might get beat. And he was able to do that with Chuck Norris in that film. Great acting in order to present that, and yet to still present the strength. And Chuck did also. Chuck presented that little bit of vulnerability, and yet he was a true warrior. Bruce's speed is legendary. Bruce did a lot of training with the Wing Chun, the dummy. He worked a great deal on his strength, but he did it primarily with calisthenics. He did not use weights. He did it as naturally as you possibly could. One of the premises of weightlifting is that you isolate every muscle to develop it. And yet in the real world, particularly in our world of martial arts, no muscle ever works isolated. Muscles work in groups. Muscles work in teams. So Bruce developed his muscles in a team. They weren't fighting each other. They were so used to working together, it added to the flow. Most martial artists don't like to run. They like to train, but running is something they don't necessarily like to, as they say, waste their time doing. They'd rather be kicking and punching. Bruce liked to run. I like to run. And someone asked me, they said, well, Pat, why is it that you like to run? And Chuck was there and Bruce and I said, you know, running is the one thing that really keeps me the most fit of all of the other exercises that I do. And I like the endurance. I like to be able to go 15 rounds. I like to stay in shape, all of these wonderful things. And so I think Chuck turned to Bruce and says, well, Bruce, why do you like to run? And Bruce says, you never know when you're going to have to catch somebody to beat them up. Bruce Lee, as a legacy, he has brought more people into the martial arts from the lay community than anyone else in the world. To think that that one man is responsible for bringing literally millions of people around the world into the martial arts. The benefits that those people have received, who knows how many people have saved their lives by being able to fight or to defend themselves. Who knows how many people's lives have been enhanced by the physical conditioning that they gained from training in the martial arts. This is a legacy that will go on forever because those people, certainly people like myself, though he didn't bring me into the martial arts, I learned so much from him that the people that I bring into the martial arts are indirectly brought in by Bruce Lee because I apply so many of the things that he did into my work, and it's still bringing people in. So it goes on. In addition to that, the pleasure that he has given to so many people and the hope, because his films were very positive. They were violent, but the good guy won. The good guy won. And bottom line, and that always, always feels good. So the pleasure that he has given to people, and probably the boost he gave to the martial arts, of course, that goes without saying. Many people are successful financially in martial arts businesses because of Bruce. But that really is an enduring and an endearing legacy.